the Nurses Doing GAMSAT podcast, brought to you by Thank Flip GAMSAT. We're here to teach you how to smash the GAMSAT, get into medicine, and become a flippin' great doctor.
Congratulations, you've got your GAMSAT score.
Yes.
And you've come a long way. And I genuinely hope that you're happy with what you've achieved and the score you've gotten. But here's the uncomfortable truth. It's not over yet. The next step, the applications and the bits that follow, are not just admin. You don't just fill in a form, press submit, and automatically you get an interview because you deserve one, right? As with all things GAMSAT and medical school related, it's more complicated than that, and it's strategic as well. So CASPer matters, interviews matter, and if you get this stage wrong, you can have the right scores and still miss out. But if you get it right, you might be more competitive than you think. So welcome back to the Nurses Doing GAMSAT podcast. This is for health professionals, nurses, science students, and future doctors navigating the GAMSAT applications, interviews, and the path into medicine. My name's Dr. Tom Forfa, and I'm the founder of Thank Flip GAMSAT, and today I'm joined by Bhakti. And,
Yay!
Yay! And Bhakti is our applications, CASPer, and interview lead here at Thank Flip. She's a second-year medical student at Notre Dame. She coaches students across applications, CASPer, and interviews, and she even trains doctors preparing for a CASPer-style assessment for their RACGP college exams. So you've got the right person here to go through with this. So welcome, Bhakti.
Thanks, Tom. I'm so excited to be here today because this is the point where I've been speaking to a lot of students, and this is the point where they get kind of relaxed about the whole process because the hard part's over. You know, I don't have to sit the GAMSAT again, but this is where the strategy matters the most. And I've always said the applications can make or break your chances of getting an interview, right? So I'm really excited to talk about why it's not just your as I just said, it's not just your GAMSAT result or your GPA, but applications isn't just like a wish list that, oh, I want to, really go to Melbourne. I hope it happens, fingers crossed. But we really need to think about things like CASPer and interviews and applications and how they all tie in together for you to be able to get an offer. So any resources or programs that we mentioned today are going to be linked in the show notes. So if you're on a podcast app, just scroll down to find those. And if you want help with your next step. And if this episode helps, make sure to follow or subscribe to Nurses Doing GAMSAT so you don't miss the next episode.
Amazing. Yeah, and I think the interesting point is that we've got some people are they feel like, hey, I've got an amazing score, I'm definitely going to get an interview. And while there's others who are like, well, I don't think I've got a chance. And neither of those are the ideal place kind of attitude to have, because it's kind of like an ideal middle. Because the key thing is that there are a few people that this episode will really help. If you have a valid GAMSAT score from this recent exam or from the past 4 years, the GAMSAT score lasts for 4 years, this is going to help you. You have to have passed each section of the GAMSAT, right? If you failed one of the sections, one or more, then unfortunately, the interviews are not going to, or the applications are not going to pan out. You do need to have passed each section. And if you want help increasing your GAMSAT score, go to the show notes and seek us out. We can help you with that. The other people that this is for is people who are wondering, all right, I've got a score, what's next? And you want to get a big picture overview, but then also start going to the details of what to do around CASPer, around preferences, around interviews. And so what we're going to be doing in this episode is we're going to take you through a few steps. We're going to talk about the problems that you're facing and the two main kind of barriers or situations you've got to understand, which is the complexity of the medical schools. There's 14 different medical schools. They're all a bit different. And the GEMSAS system and the non-GEMSAS system, like the application systems, and then the three problems that we see people making. And so we're going to walk you through that to make sure that you're on the right path. Cool. So why don't we, Bhakti, talk about why... let's jump to the medical schools and talk about the 14 different medical schools and how they're all a bit different, because that'll explain why this isn't just a wish list and it's not just admin. And you'll see really how you need to be strategic about this process. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'm going to share the screen. But if you're not, we're going to talk you through this anyway. If you're listening to this on Spotify or wherever, we'll just talk you through this. So Bhakti, why don't you help us go through this, each of these medical schools here.
Yeah, so we actually did this a couple of days ago with our boot campers, and it was such a great meeting. Like, everyone had so many great questions, but the important thing that I learned is that a lot of people don't actually understand how important the order that you rank when you go to apply is. And it's not just like a guessing game that, oh, I think this university will be good, or this university, is where I live, or whatever it is. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cough, but yeah, it's important to understand that, number one, being eligible according to the website of the uni that you're applying to doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be competitive. So if you look at the top line in the GAMSAT section for all the universities, it just says, their website just says you just need 50 or more overall, or 50 or more in each section. And that's the case for most unis. They're just like, you just need to pass the GAMSAT overall, and you need to pass each section as well.
Yeah, that's just so that they accept your application, right? So that you can apply.
Yeah, and that's obviously similar for even those universities that consider GAMSAT to be a hurdle. But that's slightly different. I'll talk about that in a second. But most unis will say, yep, just pass overall. But if you think about it, most people that are applying to medical school aren't just going to be applying with a 50 GAMSAT and a 5.5 GPA, right? They're going to have perfect GPAs with really high GAMSAT scores. So you're not just trying to meet that minimum criteria. You're trying to be competitive against everyone else applying. So a minimum GPA, a minimum GAMSAT does not mean that you have a realistic chance, really. And some schools will value GAMSAT heavily, and some schools will value GPA really heavily. And you can kind of see that in the med school summary page, which universities those are. And then other universities will require CASPer, like Notre Dame, Wollongong, and they'll focus more on those sorts of things. So it's really important that when you're applying, you've got a well-rounded application, because you get to make 6 preferences. And if you don't get selected by your first one, you still need to be somewhat competitive for your second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth option if you want to be able to land an interview.
Yeah, let's take a step back and talk about the difference between the GEMSAS and non-GEMSAS unis. But
yeah, totally. So
that's a good point.
Yeah, so GEMSAS universities are most universities. And you basically, the difference is that when you go to apply to these universities like ANU, Deakin, Griffith, Melbourne, UWA, Notre Dame's, things like that, and we have that on our page, like the med school summary on both GEMSAS universities, and you get to see which ones those are, and then there's information about all of them, and then non-GEMSAS universities, same sort of deal. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to see the screen. But GEMSAS universities, when you go to apply, you apply through the GEMSAS portal, which basically means that you're not applying to Melbourne by itself and then Notre Dame by itself. Instead, you're applying to the GEMSAS portal, and then they send out all the applications to all the different universities. They do what they need to do, and then through GEMSAS, you get your interview offer and then subsequently your offer as well. Non-GEMSAS universities, on the other hand, you're basically applying through them. So those are UCID, UTAS, I think also Monash as well, Flinders. Those are the 4 non-GEMSAS universities, and for those unis you apply through their website or their portal separately. So if you apply to Flinders, you haven't automatically applied to Monash, UCID and UTAS as well. You have to go and apply to them specifically. And then
Can I just jump in there? Because I think this creates an opportunity. This is how people end up with like 2-3 interviews, right? They get
Yeah.
one from the GEMSAS system, and we'll talk about how that system works in a second. And then they get, they might get one from one of the non-GEMSAS, or a few of them. Like we had a boot camper, Holly, recently, who she got offers from 3 medical schools. So she got UCID, Flinders, and I think it was and Deakin. And so that's kind of how it happens. The downside is it creates extra complexity, because then you've got to understand, how do I maximize my chances of getting an interview for each of these medical schools? Which ones can I actually apply for? Which one's worth applying for?
Yeah. And also the dates are sometimes different as well. So you really want to be on top and organized of when the applications close for Flinders and when the applications close for UWA. And I checked this morning that for some of the non-GEMSAS universities, that information is out. So by the time you guys see this, it'll be updated on our website as well. So you can access all of that and then see what the dates are, and then go from there.
Yeah, they're all a little bit different, these medical schools. They all believe that they've got the answer to how to best select students. So we always laugh about that, because they're all different. And it's that's how it is. But it does make things more complicated, unfortunately.
It does. They just can't make it easy, including med school.
Because it used to be that all the schools were under GEMSAS, and then UCID pulled out because they're like, it's UCID. They're like, we're special. We're going to do this our own way. And then Flinders went, and Monash went, and then UTAS is a new medical school. So they've gone, no, we're going to do it our own way. So now we have what we have.
What do we want to talk about next?
Oh, yeah. I was waiting. I thought maybe there was a connection error. Okay. Let's head over to the med school summary and kind of keep going. Let's go through each of these schools and just talk about the uniquenesses in how they are different. Because firstly, like if you look across the GAMSAT kind of minimum requirements, so firstly, they're generally around that 50 in each section or 50 overall, until you get to a couple like Monash that don't require not required. And then you get some of them a little bit different, like Notre Dame, slightly different. And then they have the weighted and unweighted GAMSAT scores. So if it wasn't enough, they calculate the GAMSAT scores differently. And Wollongong just use it as a hurdle as well. So you just need the minimum, and above that, they don't care what you have.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we've got the GPAs. That's a whole other. What are your thoughts on the GPAs there, Bhakti?
I find the GPA system is again, they just can't make it easy, right? So there's a couple of things that I thought we'd just touch on about the GPA so that applicants this year do know what the whole process is, or get some insight into how it works. But the first thing that I want everyone to bear in mind is that universities calculate GPA very differently, right? Some unis use weighted GPAs, some unis use unweighted GPAs, some use them as a head or whatever it is, right? So what a weighted GPA is basically you are weighing all 3 years of your degree differently, right? So what a weighted GPA means is that your third year is weighted the most, so they triple whatever your GPA from that year was. Then your second year is doubled, and then your first year is unweighted. And then they use all of that, they divide it by the number of units that you've done, and they give you your GPA. So what that means is that if you have, for example, done really well in your third year, then that might bump your GPA up. But if you've kind of not done that well compared to your first year, then that might bring your GPA down. But the reason they do that is because generally the third year of your degree tends to be harder, and they want to see that you can consistently perform rather than as things start to get harder, that your grades start dropping as well. So the unis that use that are places like Notre Dame, Melbourne, UQ, those sorts of places use sorry,
Yeah.
they use, that's a different point. They use unweighted GAMSAT scores, but Notre Dame for sure uses weighted GPA. And I think Melbourne does as well. I'm not sure about UQ's actually UQ's actually changed something about their GPA system, and that now they use the most recent key degree only. But yeah, we can
and then it
chat
gets
more about
a bit more complicated when you've got a master's or a PhD. Some of the schools will give you, if you've completed a PhD, they'll give you a 7 GPA automatically, while others will give you some bonus points if you've done a master's, or depends on what type of master, like master's by coursework at Notre Dame here. So the point here is that there are a lot of details here, and if you want to see what we're looking at here, we compare them all side by side, and there'll be a link to it in the in the show notes. But then that's kind of the minimum requirements, right? And then let's talk about we'll skip a couple of things here. There's a 10-year rule, how long ago you could have done your degree, all these bits and pieces. But then there's the kind of the minimums that are actually required to be competitive. We refer to these as the cutoff scores. Now, the thing to know about the cutoff scores is that the universities generally don't release these. They don't tell you what those are. So we're kind of trying to estimate these based on what we have gathered, the information we've gathered from our students and elsewhere. And then that's one of the limitations of that, right? This is what we've tried to figure out. Then the other thing to consider is that these were last year's cutoffs, not this upcoming year's cutoffs, because we don't know what those are going to be. We're kind of assuming that they're going to be kind of similar, because we don't know until they've actually done all the applications and submitted everyone's and accepted everyone. So there's this, you're making these decisions in this environment of uncertainty. Uncertainty because we're not 100% sure about these results, but then also there were last year's results. And so that's kind of one of the challenges that you're facing with these applications too, because then once we talk about preferences, you'll see how important this is. And then you've got the number of places as well, which varies between the medical schools, which that should come into your consideration as well when you've got the larger schools versus the smaller ones. And then we get to the really interesting part, is how they decide who gets an interview offer. So, Bhakti, do you want to run us through that one? Because this gets complicated.
This is so different for every single uni that I'm just getting flashbacks to when I was ordering my preferences and just going through, oh, this uni looks really good. Oh, wait, I'm not really likely to get an offer because of so and so. So it's really important to consider a couple of things before you just go and randomly apply to some place. So the first thing is, obviously, you want to consider the location of the uni. If you're not willing to move to Wollongong, or if you're not willing to move to Canberra, whatever it is, then do not apply to Wollongong or ANU or whatever uni it is, because it sucks when you get an offer from a place and you're like, I just got an offer from a med school, I don't really feel like moving away, and then you have to decline the offer. That sucks, right? You put so many years of effort in, and now it all just came down to this one thing. So it's really important that you're deciding based on where you're comfortable moving to. The second thing is that a lot of different unis will have different ways in how they rank where you're going to get an offer based on GPA, GAMSAT values, personal statements, CASPer, bonus points, things like that. So, for example, a place like Macquarie, they tend to give bonus points to people that have Macquarie. They've done Bachelor of Clinical Science at Macquarie. And then another thing to keep note is that all places are full fee paying, so you don't get any CSP help, things like that. And then places like UTAS tend to only take people that went to UTAS as well. So it's important that you're researching all these different universities and thinking, am I even qualified for this? Or do I meet, the minimum requirements, things like that. A lot of people apply to University of Wollongong because they're like, oh, GPA and GAMSAT minimum hurdle, but then they only meet 2 of the bonus points to get in, and they're just unlikely to get an offer from University of Wollongong because 50% of your interview offer comes from being able to meet as many of those bonus points. So it's really important that you're slowly going through these different systems to be able to best identify where you're able to get the highest chance of getting an interview.
Because just briefly on Wollongong, we recorded a podcast episode on this last year. They have changed how they select people. They pretty much said, GAMSAT, you just need to get the minimum. We don't care what you get above that. We don't use that to select you. And I think it's the same with GPA as well. And then they just go on these bonus points. They've got this list of bonus points that, you know, that they use to kind of rank people. But a lot of the thing is, one of the bonus points is put us first. And that's a bonus point. And people are like, I'm going to put them first and I get an extra bonus point. Well, yeah, but everyone's going to do that. Everyone who is likely to get in to the Wollongong is going to put them first. So that's almost like a mute point. So you need other factors there as well. Many of them, like Bhakti was saying, probably at least 4 of them are important. And then you've got something called CASPer. So do you want to run us through CASPer and how that plays into it, Bhakti?
Totally. So if you are planning on applying to Wollongong or any of the Notre Dames, if you haven't already registered for the CASPer, sorry, I should clarify, if you're applying this year and you're applying to Wollongong or Notre Dame Sydney, Notre Dame Fremantle, if you haven't already registered for the CASPer, you need to do that now because there's only one more sitting left unless you're an international student. And after that, if you miss out on any of the dates for the CASPer, then you can't apply to Fremantle, Wollongong or Sydney because they use that as part of that application. Second thing is, when you apply for the CASPer, it gives you the option to pick how many unis you want to send your score off to. So if you only say that, yeah, I only want to send it to Sydney, then later on when you apply, you can't send it to Fremantle and Wollongong as well. So make sure that to maximize your chances, you are just picking whichever ones you want to apply to. But CASPer is basically what I like to call, I love the CASPer. It's one of my favorite things ever. That sounds really nerdy, but I do love
it. It's like the interviews, but just fun.
It is the interviews, but just fun, right? Like, it's basically a mini version of an interview, and these unis use CASPer as a way to filter out interview applicants. So that tends to make the interview a lot more competitive. But what the CASPer is testing is basically just, it's basically just testing your empathy, your communication skills, your understanding of ethical principles. And it's basically situational judgment, right? You get particular scenarios, specific situations, and a lot of them are ethical dilemmas, like, you know, one of your friends steals some other friend's bike, but they're really poor, so do you go and tell them or not? Things like that, and you're basically forced to make a judgment there, and they're trying to see what your reasoning behind a particular decision is.
Yeah, that's good. You okay there, Bhakti?
Yeah.
Oh, good. All good. Yeah, and so we'll talk about CASPer a bit more in a sec, but I just wanted to highlight how important it is because, for example, for Notre Dame, when they're selecting who gets an interview, it's worth 30% of the ranking. That's worth as much as your GAMSAT score, right? And your GPA, which you spent 3 years on. And then later on, when they're making offers, you know, it's got the interview becomes really important. And so the reason why we highlight this is to just show you that we haven't even talked about bonus points. Actually, let's briefly touch on bonus points. Because most med schools, you can see here, as I scroll through the med school comparison tool, they all have something. They all have some kind of way where they've gone, well, you know what? If you have this and this, we'll give you a couple extra points. And it's all a little bit different for the schools. So what are your thoughts on that, Bhakti?
So I think bonus points are important to give you a boost in your application. I don't think that for most universities it's like a make or break. Like, you know, if you have, I'll use Notre Dame Fremantle as an example, it's my home turf. They have a particular 10% bonus that they give based on high degree research, rurality, and having lived in WA for 10 years. If you have a crap GPA and a crap GAMSAT score, that WA bonus is not going to make the difference in your interview offer, or, you know, boost you so high that you end up landing an interview offer. But having these bonuses can put a specific edge on your application, and that if you're like, you know, on the borderline with a bunch of other people and you have some of these bonus points, they can help kind of push you over and make you a little bit more competitive compared to other people. So, but on the other hand, places like UWA, where if you've done a PhD and you get a 7 GPA, can transform your application, right? So it just depends where you're applying to, whether you meet any of the bonus points, and some, for example, universities will just give you a little bit of a bonus for having a PhD. So you really want to look at these different unis and see where your particular background can be maximized to increase your chances of being able to get an interview.
Yeah, and this is why we say it's strategic, where you might have the GAMSAT and GPA and miss out because you didn't quite understand these bits and pieces, where someone who did, they got ahead and they got in. And on the other hand, you may have scores that are a bit borderline, a bit grey zone, but then you can edge ahead if you do this correctly. So awesome. So thank you for going through that, Bhakti. So that's the first part that makes this whole application process challenging. The second part is the GEMSAS system. So let's kind of talk about that briefly. So the way that works is, as Bhakti was saying earlier, you apply to one place for most of those medical schools. What was it, like 10 of them? But you only get an interview with one of them. And so you have to put in the order of preferences. Which is your first preference medical school, second, third, fourth, all the way down to 6 preferences. So some of them have to be left off. And then the order is really important. Because the way that the system works, because everybody throws in their applications, and that the algorithm has been calibrated to give as many of the first preferences as possible. So when they've gone through and they've allocated, let's say if one medical school has 100 positions, and they want to fill 100 of those interview positions, hypothetically speaking, right? They're going to go, all right, first preferences, who qualifies? Bang, they fill out those 100 preferences. And before they go to the second preferences, so if you put the medical school that you could get into as a second preference, by the time they get around to the second preference, it's already filled up. So you might miss out on an interview offer anywhere because you put that second, your most likely medical school as second rather than first. So this is why we say it's not a wish list, right? It's like, oh, I'd love to go to the University of Melbourne, but I've got scores for University of Wollongong. I'm going to put Melbourne first, Wollongong second. Well, by the time they've done all the first preferences, all the schools are filled and you've missed out on everything. Whereas if you had done it the other way around, right, you're more likely to actually get that University of Wollongong interview. And so let's say you've now done the interview. The interviews have been completed. This is the next thing that makes the GEMSAS system really good, but also challenging, is let's say you've done the interview and the university, let's say you went University of Wollongong first, University of Melbourne second. You did the interview with the University of Wollongong, and they're like, you know what? They're not quite right. They're not for us. We're going to select someone else. And so generally, in the other medical schools, like the non-GEMSAS ones, you just miss out. But the beauty of the GEMSAS system is that you go back into the pool, as they say, back into the pool. And then the other medical schools might be like, let's say University of Melbourne have gone, we've done all our interviews, but we didn't quite fill in all the positions. We weren't quite happy with all of the applicants. So we've got 2 positions left. And they go back into that pool and they're like, well, there you are. And they pull you out and they give you an offer for a position at the University of Melbourne, right? And this stuff happens all the time. So people get their second, third, fourth preferences, which if you've done it right, they could be more of a higher scoring medical school. and they get the offers. And so this is why some of the online kind of cutoff scores are misleading, where you see people going, oh, I got into the University of Melbourne with a 64 or a 63. It's like, yeah, but that was because that was after the interview round and they probably got pulled out of that pool. So that's the second factor that makes this complicated. You've got all these different medical schools with all the different requirements, plus you've got the GEMSAS system. So here are the 3 mistakes that we see people making that I want you to avoid, and I'll talk about how to avoid them and how we can help you do that as well. So the first one is assuming that your scores are like your GAMSAT score is the determining factor, or that because your score is X, your chances are fixed. Now, this can go either way. Some people might go, hey, I've got a great score in the mid-70s or more, I'm going to get in. That might not be the case. And then the other people who are like, oh, I've got a lower score, I'm not going to get in. So either of those are not, can potentially be wrong, and you've got to be careful with how you approach it. Because like we said earlier, there are all these different factors where you need to understand where you stand, what makes you competitive, what are your strengths, and what are your weaknesses. So this is your GPA, weighted and unweighted. What's your GAMSAT score, weighted and unweighted? Your bonuses, are you rural students? CASPer interviews. Do you have, what kind of a advanced degree do you have? Where do you live? All these things play in, and you've got to really understand where you sit. What are your strengths and weaknesses, and what makes you kind of competitive? So that's the first mistake, right? Not kind of or not understanding that and not playing that correctly. The second one is, we've mentioned it before, but I want to highlight it again and put into context now, is treating this like a wish list or like admin, where if you put the school you'd love to go to, but you don't have the scores first, you're probably not going to get it or anything else. So you need to be really, you need to take the kind of your strengths and weaknesses, and then allocate the preferences in a way that makes you stand out, right? That gets you ahead. And again, we're making decisions in an environment of uncertainty where you don't know how everybody else is going to go this year. And that's the thing. You're not competing with people from last year. You're competing with the people who have done the GAMSAT now, who are applying this year. And it's all kind of all new again, because we don't know who they are and what they're going to be putting down. We kind of make some estimations based on last year, some rough estimations, because the medical schools don't release those results. And so then you've got to really systematically go through and go, all right, what's my first preference? What's my second preference? What's my third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and where do I stand on each of these? And so you're going through them one at a time and really making some big decisions there. And the third mistake, and I think this is where Bhakti's strengths come in, is ignoring CASPer and the interviews until later, and not really seeing them as an essential part of your pathway to getting in. I'm going to hand that over to you, Bhakti. Tell us a bit more about that.
So I've been working with students that have made this mistake before, right? They leave the CASPer to last minute because they're thinking about their GPA and GAMSAT and interviews and things like that. But those are so CASPer and interviews are not later problems, right? That's the wrong way to think. Because when you choose a medical school, you're basically choosing a selection pathway, right? For some schools, CASPer is a huge part of whether you land an interview or not. For Notre Dame, it's worth a third of your application. It's weighted just as much as your GAMSAT score, just as much as your GPA. And for Wollongong, it's worth half your application, right? So all universities, after a certain point, this interview performance becomes the biggest part of your final ranking. So if you ignore the CASPer, sorry, my canaries are going off in the background.
Yeah, I can hear them.
Yeah, I know it sounds really nice, but they're actually fighting over some food right now. So.
Yeah, I can imagine it'll be distracting when you're there.
Yeah.
But it sounds lovely from this end.
Yeah. But back to my point, if you ignore the CASPer and you ignore the interviews until later, you might end up you might be forced to choose a pathway where you're not actually likely to get an interview offer, right? I'll use myself as an example, going back to like the first mistake that people make, underestimating their GAMSAT and GPA. I didn't even consider Notre Dame as an option because I was like, no, I want to go to UWA, I want to go to other universities. And before I really stopped and I thought about, CASPer is actually something that I could probably be really good at because I do those sorts of things for work, and like I have practice doing that for other things as well. I sat the CASPer, I got a 4th quartile, and all of a sudden my chances of going to Notre Dame Fremantle was so much better than getting a spot at any of the other universities, right? And if you don't think about things that way, or if you don't ignore the CASPer, ignore the interview, then you're potentially preventing yourself from being able to apply to one of these universities and more likely than not actually get an offer as well. So it's really important that you're thinking about these things, because for all of these different universities, there's so many things that matter and there's so many different things that can affect your ranking, and they're not just bonus extra things, they're major, major, major parts of getting an interview offer as well.
Yeah, I think the interview itself is really interesting. It is, for a lot of the schools, worth 50% once you've done the interview. They're like, well, it's pretty much you do really well in the interview and get in, or you don't do well and you don't get in.
And so many people think that, once you get to the interview, you've basically got an offer, right? No. Like, you're competing against so many people, and it's just, that is one of the most important parts. And if you're not thinking about that from this point, then you're really just not setting yourself up for success.
Yeah, and so we've talked about CASPer, but let's talk about what the interviews, what they're actually testing. Like, what is this kind of? I know it's a situational judgment test. Like, who cares? Like, what's the big deal?
Yeah. So I actually.
Bhakti's like, how dare you, Tom? It's a big deal.
Yeah, excuse me. This is my bread and butter, right? But the reason I love the CASPer and interviews so much is because I'm year by year seeing that shift where obviously GPA is still really important, obviously GAMSAT's really important, but these unis are shifting towards being a doctor is not just about being really smart, because you more likely than not will be really smart if you get in, but also it's about those human aspects as well, right? Can you show empathy in a really difficult situation? Do you have self-awareness? Do you have professional reasoning, things like that? And that's such an important part of being a doctor, and that is what CASPer and interviews are testing. They're testing judgment, communications, ethics, ability to think like a future doctor. And this is where a lot of really strong academic candidates fail, not because they're bad people or because they don't want to become a doctor, but it's because they don't understand what they're actually looking for, which is judgment, empathy, structure, being able to look at everything that's affecting a particular circumstance, consider them, and then come up with a well-rounded response. So you could have all of these qualities, but still not be able to show them under pressure and not perform well in the CASPer.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the test. Is like, if you had all the time in the world, you could probably figure it out and give a great answer. But you've got a few seconds, and in CASPer they record your face, like, so you're talking to the camera and you're kind of talking through your answers, or you're typing them out. There's a couple of options, and these situations they give you, it can be quite like professionally complex and awkward, and the way that you work through them and talk through them is key. There's no like right answer. What's the right answer? It's more like how you professionally and empathetically work through it in a really, really effective way that makes you a great person to have in a professional and a medical environment. Because I know that this is what and it's not a judgment of whether you're a good person or bad person. It's whether you will thrive in the environment where of healthcare.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of key, and because right now it's so important that to the point that the Royal Australian College of GPs, so the people that create GPs, they have incorporated CASPer into their selection criteria just recently, right? And Bhakti's training doctors on how to do that, right? which has been interesting because she's got like the senior doctors coming to a second year medical student, but she's the expert. Like, hey, I'm the
teaching
expert here,
consultant level doctors how to like, just like be empathetic. And it's like, but speaking of,
what is that? What is the pathway for being empathetic? What is the decision pathway for that?
It's like, can you like put that on a graph for me? No, but speaking of that, one thing I really want to highlight about the CASPer is a lot of healthcare professionals like nurses, physios will feel really confident about the CASPer because they're like, oh, like I understand how to be empathetic. I understand, what clinical judgment is like. So I'm going to perform well on the CASPer. But something that I just want to highlight is that the CASPer's not testing, medically, am I going to be able to deal with difficult situations? Because oftentimes a lot of these situations or circumstances that you get put in won't be related to medicine, right? You'll be put in a situation that's like, your friend is going through a tough time, dealing with a breakup, cheating on a test, things like that, and you have to show your empathy there. So if you get a medical scenario, they don't want to start hearing about, oh, this is how I would, I would first do their bloods, and then I would look at this, and then I would, do a bunch of examinations and history taking and that all of stuff, that stuff. But instead, they're trying to test your empathy and the reasoning behind why you come up with a particular response. And that's why they're using a whole, range of scenarios that don't necessarily have to do with medical situations so that they can pick that out and see that, it's not just in one setting that it's happening, and see how you would respond in a variety of different situations.
What I find particularly interesting, and this kind of applies to the interviews as well as CASPer, right? So if you're going, oh, I'm not applying for the CASPer unis, it applies to the interviews as well. Right? They're testing for similar kinds of things. One of the scenarios that I've seen in CASPer is where it's in an office. It seems like in an admin department of an office that's not medical at all. And one of the team is going to the photocopier. They pick up and they see that the boss has been photocopying documents that look like they're not true. And then a colleague comes along and goes, hey, what are you doing? Oh, I've just found these documents. And then where do you go to from there? Do you tell the colleague and you spread rumors around the office? Do you go make a TikTok about it? Do you go, Leo, what do you do? How do you actually step this out in a professional way? And I think this is probably one of the things that a lot of people going through this process will probably struggle with. Not everyone, like people will funnel into different areas. Like the nurses and healthcare professionals, they'll be like, good, I got this bit sorted, I got some of these bits sorted, but then there'll be other aspects, like actually in that circumstance, I'm not quite sure what would be the best path. And then you've got people who have been, who have worked in admin, or maybe who have had who are uni students or tutors or whatever. They know one particular way, but they don't know another. So and it's not something you can wing either, and it's not like something you can kind of take lightly with the percentages that are coming into place here in terms of weighting of the interviews and CASPer. But so we've covered a lot of things here. So just to kind of recap, right? You're facing, it's a really important situation that you're in. Well done on getting to this point. There isn't much time at this stage. That's part of the challenge. The GEMSAS applications close on the 29th of May, which is this coming Friday. Then the non-GEMSAS one's kind of staggered after that. But then CASPer is only a week or two after that. And then you've got interviews. When the interviews drop, you don't have much time to prepare. Some of the schools, they give you like a week and a half before the interview. Some of them give you a little bit more time, but it just depends which one you get. And so the key is to make some big decisions now, and to move forward in a really committed and in a really impactful way now. So, well done on listening to this. And, hopefully this helps you to make some good decisions. But if you want to move quickly, and if you want our help to be able to make the right moves with your preferences, with where you stand, what your strengths and weaknesses are, systematically going through this stuff, giving yourself the best chance with getting an interview, and then with the CASPer prep and with the interview prep, then let's go through some of the programs that we have that might be able to help you guys. So let's start with the applications bootcamp. This is kind of the obvious next step. So the applications bootcamp essentially covers everything you need to go from here to submitting your best application. So we help you to do that strategically. So we help our students decode the admissions guides, so that you're not kind of trying to figure it out yourself, but you have a systematic step-by-step process to identify what are your weaknesses and strengths. Where do you stand? Where do you stand on each of the medical schools? We have, worksheets and templates. We have the interview offer maximizer, which helps you to, structure your offers your preferences in such a way that maximizes your chances. We also review your application. So we have group sessions where we review these and we look at yours and we go, all right, no, you need to change this and that. And we're doing these all throughout the week. And we can help you get on the right path. The CASPer Edge program, we have that. So let me go back a step. So the applications bootcamp is one. There's going to be a link in the show notes if you want to find out more and join. Then we've got the CASPer Edge program. And so this is run by Bhakti and a couple of our team as well. We've got instructional videos on how to make sure that you're ready for any question that comes up. And this isn't about memorizing responses. It's about knowing how to fit your judgment into the unusual circumstances and scenarios they give you, and how to communicate that effectively, whether it's spoken on a video or whether it's typed. And we have live sessions where we practice with you and give you feedback. We have mock exams, questions banks, guided instructionals to make sure that you get a great score. And we actually guarantee that you get a fourth quartile result as well. Go to the show notes if you want to know more about that. Anything you want to add about the CASPer Edge program? Because I know you're very passionate about that.
I am very passionate about it, but the point I just want to hone in is that the CASPer is not something you just want to wing. It's not just I know that I just love it, so I'm saying it's really fun and this and that, but it's not just like a fun little haha pop quiz. But it's not just the challenge isn't being a good person, because most likely you are a good person, but instead it's showing that judgment, that empathy and maturity under pressure that's important. And that's something that you have to work on and build that skill, so that on the day you're not crumbling under pressure and then not being able to respond.
Yeah, and it's also getting it out of your head and into a structure that you can articulate and show that you understand what you're talking about and really shine through. That's part of it as well, because people are like, I know this stuff.
Yeah.
But can you do it on the day, under pressure, and do it in that certain amount of time that they give you and make it all pop?
Yeah. And I don't want to scare people, but if you don't know anything about the CASPer, then you only get a minute to respond to these things, right? That's not enough time at all, especially if you're a waffler. So that practice, learning those strategies and structures is really important to be able to perform well.
Yeah, and we practice with you to make sure that you got it honed in. And that's why we're so confident that you'll get a great result if you follow our process.
Yeah.
And then we've got the interview bootcamp. Right. And so this is all about making sure that you understand not just the medical ethics, but the types of questions that come up and how to stand out. Because we say there's three different types of questions. There's the direct, there's the ethical based scenarios, and then you've got these kind of there's this kind of miscellaneous group of like surprise types of questions where sometimes they put them in, sometimes they don't. And the direct questions are very kind of like interrogational style, almost like what support are you going to have throughout medical school? How are you going to pay your bills? Why do you want to be a doctor? Very kind of specific ones. And how, or give me an example of a time where you've worked through conflict. How would you, And so those types of questions. Then you've got the ethical scenarios, which is kind of similar to CASPer, but they tend to be these ones tend to kind of err on the side of medically kind of context questions, but they can go the other way as well. So they'll be like, that there is a liver that's on the donor list that's become available, and you've got two people to choose from. One is an elderly gentleman who has XYZ, and then the second one is a mother of three who has a substance abuse problem. Who are you going to give the liver to? And then you got to work through again your explanation of why you would choose them, how you would choose them, and making a decision in the end. And that's just an example of one of them. And then you've got others where you're given an image and you're asked to talk about that image, or D-Tech questions where you're trying to simplify a particular complex topic and explain in a really simple way, or talk someone through solving a puzzle. Like they just come up with the craziest things. And I know Buck likes that stuff as well. Like I personally, I've got a love-hate relationship with it personally, because I went through my first interview, I messed up. I had an interview with the University of Sydney, and I had all the scores, right? I know this stuff because I've made the mistakes. I had all the scores, the GPAs, all the things, but I messed up the interview and I didn't get in. And then I turned things around. The next year I got into a medical school, and then down the track I actually became one of the interviewers on the panel asking the questions. And we've trained tons of people through this process as well. So we've created a process that helps people who are confident with interviews really shine and adapt their skills to this context and environment, and also help people who are like me, ones who might have all the marks and the academic parts, but are going to fluff up the interview. And so we help you to stand out and use your abilities and skills in the best way.
Yeah, and
to add to that one, Bhakti?
I just think when people first try answering interview style questions, it's going to be bad, right? But I always say this to other students as well, is that if you, for example, were, performing a piano piece in front of every single person in your entire life and your colleagues, and this was going to absolutely change your life, you would not just walk in and wing it on the day, right? You would do it multiple times, you would prepare, you would practice, but people will just not prepare for the interview and then rock up on the day, and they're just going to try wing it on the day. But that is not how you should be doing it, right? You need to be practicing, you need to be attempting questions, and that's how you prevent messing up on the day, because you're going to make mistakes when you first try practicing these questions. But in order to prevent those mistakes happening on the actual day of the interview, you need to be practicing. And that's what we help you guys do in the interview bootcamp. Yes, we've got structure. Yes, we have all these classes, but unless you actually go away and practice them, you're not going to be able to do well on the day of the interview.
Yeah, and this might sound bad because, we have mock interviews, but a mock interview isn't going to solve all your problems, right? Doing a one-off kind of a test of your abilities is not the answer. It's about firstly understanding what are they looking for and how to be able to structure a response, and then practicing that with feedback, and with human feedback as well. Someone who knows what they're doing and how to actually present it, because it's not just about the words, it's about how you deliver it and how you're getting that empathy and that emotional and that ethical understanding across, which is honestly, after doing this for the last 19 years, there really is no other way than actually working with someone, like a person who knows what they're talking about, and getting that feedback. And that's why we structure our interview bootcamp the way that we do, where we have the lessons online, but then we also meet up twice a week to practice this stuff in the lead up. And then at the end, we do a mock interview to really refine your skills and abilities, not the other way around. So it's all about combining the different elements together. And that's what really makes you stand out, because it's at that point, we don't just want to, see what happens. We want to be so prepared that you're undeniably going to get in. And that's why, the results speak for themselves. And we're pretty proud of what we've developed over the years.
Yeah,
so,
awesome.
Yeah. So if you want to know more about that, head over to the show notes. That's our interview boot camp. Now, we know that what we've talked about is that it's not like a stepwise process. It all happens at once. So we've bundled all this up, and you can get the bundle at a much greater discount if you join by the end of the week. Go to the show notes to find out more about that. And there'll be a coupon code in there if you move quickly as well. That'll make this a no-brainer for you. So I hope that's been helpful. I hope that's been useful. I hope you've learned about the applications, CASPer, interviews, and you can see how maybe we can help you if that's for you. But otherwise, wishing you all the best. Thank you, Bhakti, for guiding us through this.
Thank you so much. Good luck to everyone. Everyone who's listening to this has worked really hard so far, and I just don't want you guys to waste your score. So take everything we spoke about today, apply it to your personal situation, reach out if you need help, and hopefully I'll see you in some of our CASPer or interview classes soon.
Amazing. Thank you, Bhakti, and thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Hey, I have a cool gift for you, just for listening to the Nurses Doing GAMSAT podcast. We do some of our best work in our Facebook group called, you guessed it, Nurses Doing GAMSAT. It's free to join, and every day we're sharing actionable guides, tips and tricks, and really just how to smash the exam and get into medicine. You can join today by searching Nurses Doing GAMSAT on Facebook. Thanks for listening to another episode, and I'll see you next time.